So this afternoon, I was listening to Luke Thomas on his live chat. He mentions how the leanings and the political ethos of the current UFC landscape, whether that would be from the promoters, the fighters, the fans, and anybody that supports mixed martial arts in any kind of way, has leaned towards the right-wing side of things. And is he correct? And if so, how does that reflect upon its future popularity, its growth, and its current trend as a competing sport with other leagues out there that have taken, let's say, a left-wing leaning? For example, in the Premier League, they started wearing rainbow flags, okay, to try to appease a certain type of demographic. And then in the NBA, obviously, there's the aspect of BLM, and then in the NHL, the same thing. But the UFC is taking a way different leaning. In other words, they're taking the approach of letting the people say whatever they want to say with no repercussions to their monetary value or their earnings, or perhaps their future outcomes and opportunities. Those are not a disqualification to any degree, as opposed to, let's say, Colin Kaepernick, which, as you guys know, who don't understand American football and don't understand the American landscape of its political upheaval, you got to take a look at Colin Kaepernick standing up to what he believes is police brutality by taking a knee during a national anthem before an NFL game is being played, instead of putting his hands on his chest, pledging to the flag as how most people do in the United States. So he decided to take a stand on that. And because of that, there were consequences to follow. Conor McGregor talks about Khabib's wife and talks about our religion, and then goes out and talks about Dustin Poirier and his whole entire family, all to drum up a fight. And then you have Sean Strickland, who was a former neo-Nazi. Granted, he repented from his second chance in life and became a world champion. But not only that, a world champion that the entire right-wing community absolutely adores. But of course, it's always safe to understand that with Trump, with Sean Strickland, he's not a Trump guy. So Trump is not for everybody. However, Trump is a big supporter of mixed martial arts, and mixed martial arts just has a right-wing fan base. And I'm going to go into a couple of reasons as to why that is. For one, you got to understand, when it comes to mixed martial arts, you have to go back to boxing in the 90s in order to understand the dynamics of the sport. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because Floyd Mayweather once mentioned something to the effect of the only reason why people go out and fight in mixed martial arts is simply because they just couldn't hack it in boxing. In other words, he's trying to say that everybody wants to be a boxer, everybody wants to be rich, and come up with the money that you make in boxing, especially on a superstar level with the likes of Floyd Mayweather. Not in MMA, where the sport back then was not making that much money, nor were the fighters. But over time, they accumulated their wealth, their notoriety, and their superstardom. But let's just be honest with what Floyd Mayweather was really trying to say. He was trying to say that the only reason why they needed MMA was because they needed, quote-unquote, white fighters to dominate in the sport of that particular discipline, obviously, because at the time, the 90s, the 2000s, and so on, it was a domination of African-American boxers that were, yes, winning all the world titles, getting all the notoriety, And furthermore, just becoming the A side of every matchup when it came to Mike Tyson versus, you name it, Peter McNeely, when it came to the likes of Muhammad Ali taking on Cooper, Chuck Wepner against Muhammad Ali, Creed versus Rocky Balboa. But of course, Rocky is a fictional movie, and guess what? He ends up winning in that movie against Apollo Creed, who was the favorite and longtime legend African-American undisputed champion in the movie as he was depicted. So mixed martial arts came along, and yes, it did give a platform to certain demographics of people that, let's just be honest, right, love to see their own kind dominate. Nowadays, in the modern UFC, it is such a diverse sample population pool of cultures, religions, creeds, regions. And because of that, everybody has a bit of a stake in the UFC. In other words, you look at the British, a proud fighting nation in their boxing. Well, now you got a lot of British fighters that are doing great in MMA, and they have a British channel to platform these guys and give them the proper notoriety that they need as they rise to the top. So, in turn, when you go back to the mid-2000s, you take a look at who was the popular champion at the time, and I'm talking about before Anderson Silva. We're talking about Rich Franklin. He was a former math teacher. He became the 185 world champion up until, of course, Anderson Silva beat him in the same similar fashion as Crawford beat up Errol Spence, but did it way faster because he knocked him out in the first round with knees and elbows and Muay Thai clinches, to which Franklin had no answer to. But rewind back to when he was champion. He attracted a certain level of demographics that I don't think the UFC has reached in its earlier days in the 90s with Royce Gracie, where it was more than just a niche sport. It was the niche of all niche sports, because very few people in the world knew what jiu-jitsu was, nor did many people out there practice it. And so because of that, it was confined to this small community. Well, now, after Dana White, the Fertitta brothers bought the UFC, they decided to go in a different direction. Spike TV, you guys remember that channel. What's significant about that channel? The emphasis of this is the man's channel. So because of that, it attracted to everything that is masculine, everything that they consider in the modern slang as based. And on top of that, the UFC has now superstars like Matt Hughes. And why is that significant? Because number one, Matt Hughes is this tough white country boy from the Midwest. So, yes, there is a wrestling demographic of people that watch the UFC, and wrestling produces the most diverse multicultural talent pool, especially in the United States and elsewhere in the world. But within the United States, it's quite a diverse sample of population in terms of the fan bases that you can garner out of it. So when Matt Hughes was the man, you got to understand there's a lot of people that don't understand wrestling. They don't understand this. They don't understand wrist locks to toe holds to all of those in between. What they understand is something that Dana White has always emphasized, which is what? Fighting is in our DNA. We all get it. And we love badasses that look like us. And he couldn't be more correct. So why is that significant? Who are the badasses that are dominating the mixed martial arts landscape today. And in all quite honesty, it is the Muslim guys and then it is the right-wing guys that's dominating the UFC. Maybe not in its entirety dominating in terms of every champion is a right-wing guy or anything like that. Although you could say that if, let's say, Colby was to defeat Leon Edwards in their upcoming matchup in December. Nonetheless, right now, when you look at all the top contenders, all the top names, such as Bryce Mitchell, who does he attract? Christians, right-wing country people, people from the Midwest, all from the old school lineage fan base of the likes of Matt Hughes. And how about the first 170-pound champion of all time in the UFC, which was none other than Pat Miletich? So what is significant about Pat Miletich? Well, I'll tell you. Pat Miletich, in the recent times, was arrested during the J6, known as the January 6th insurrection, where a group of right-wing guys protested against the results of the election and went down in history as what you saw it today. And however you want to look at it, some people look at it as the worst terrorist attack ever, and then some people look at it as, well, just Americans protesting, and then a combination of some Americans acting a fool and causing disturbance, breaking the law, committing acts of treason and acts of terrorism. And Pat Miletich was a part of that. So the lineage of the UFC's right-wing fan base isn't too far behind. But you also got to understand, they are given a culture of being allowed to say whatever it is that they want to say. And who loves that more than the right-wing people? Because you also got to understand, there is a culture of misogyny within combat sports gyms. You can't deny this. At the same time, you also can't deny that it's that same toxic trait that also produces some of the most vicious animals that you've ever seen in the sport of mixed martial arts, boxing, MMA, Muay Thai, Lethwei, bare knuckle boxing, and you can name any other combat sports out there that you'd like to fill in the blank. All these guys have gone through some of the most traumatic things in their lives, right? So words don't really hurt them. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. This is something you don't really hear anymore in America. I've heard this a lot growing up in the 90s, where, yes, there was a certain level of liberalism that was plaguing the country due to the leadership of Bill Clinton. However, the one thing that you can understand about the 90s was that no matter who was running the show, whether it was a Republican or whether it was a Democrat, they had certain lines of what they considered decency, but then at the same time, they also didn't have this aspect of cancellation that they do now. Unless you're the UFC. It is a sport that doesn't do anything to their fighters unless the law or a government agency cracks down on that particular fighter. So in other words, if you commit a crime outside of the octagon, off competition, as a signed UFC roster member, you're not going to be penalized by the UFC at any degree, unless the law decides to do something about it, or any jurisdiction that deals with you in whatever citizenship or whatever region of the world that you live in. But other than that, the UFC will do nothing to you. So that means that it is a different culture than that of the NBA, than that of Premier League soccer, which is going woke to the point of appeasing certain people that they would have never really appeased in the past. And now the UFC has always maintained a certain fan base of people that lean towards a certain ethos or something that resembles right-wing ideology of some sort. Now, why is that? Well, we can analyze also the same reason why Muslims dominate the fight game in the same similar fashion as how the right-wing Americans are also dominating the fight game. What is it that they know and understand that nobody else does? Could it be about discipline? Could it be about suspending your pleasure senses for a greater good of a later outcome? These are all conservative values, ethics, following through with the values that you believe in. Whereas with the left-wing aspect of things, maybe they don't have that same stern discipline or maneuvering into that particular way of thinking. So, is it really any surprise that mixed martial arts goes out there and attracts a community that yearns for discipline? Don't forget to like and subscribe.